But always remember this. Marines die. That's what we're here for. But the Marine Corps lives forever. And that means you live forever.
On the morning of July 2nd, 1967, nearly 400 Marines from 2 companies walked north along a dirt road in northern First Corps, heading toward a crossroads they needed to secure. Alpha and Bravo companies, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. By nightfall, 84 of them would be dead, 190 wounded, and 9 missing. It was the worst single day for Marines in the entire Vietnam War. And it was not the beginning of their story. It was not even close to the end. The 1st Battalion, 9th Marines arrived in Vietnam in June 1965 as part of the early troop buildup. Lieutenant Colonel Gruenberg brought them into country, and by August they were already running offensive operations south of Da Nang during Operation Blastout, a search and clear mission designed to push enemy forces out of the populated lowlands. Within their first year, 19 conducted hundreds of company-sized missions and lost over 100 Marines killed in action. They rotated out briefly in October 1966, came back in December, and walked straight into the worst fighting of the war. They were assigned to northern Quang Tri province, right up against the DMZ, in a stretch of ground that Marines came to call Leatherneck Square. 4 combat bases marked its corners: Con Thien and Gio Linh in the north, Dong Ha and Cam Lo in the south, roughly 6 miles wide and 9 miles deep. Every inch of it was within range of enemy artillery north of the Ben Hai River. The Marines who served there called their time in the barrel. They called the DMZ the Dead Marine Zone. Between March 1967 and February 1969, over 1,400 Marines and Navy corpsmen were killed in action inside that square alone, with more than 9,000 wounded. Let that register for a moment. And 19 bore the worst of it. The battalion participated in 3 phases of Operation Prairie, a series of sweeps meant to block enemy infiltration through the DMZ corridor. Prairie was a grinding, attritional effort. Every patrol risked ambush. Every night position risked mortar fire. Every resupply convoy risked mines. The operations achieved their tactical objectives, but the cost was relentless. By the spring of 1967, 19 had already earned a reputation within the division as the unit that took the heaviest hits and kept moving. On March 24, 1967, during Operation Prairie 3 in the Gio Linh area, Alpha Company walked into a well-prepared ambush. Small arms, automatic weapons, rockets, mortars, all coming from entrenched positions near a village. The lead platoon was getting torn apart. Sergeant Walter K. Singleton was the supply sergeant. He was in a relatively safe position in the rear. He did not stay there. Singleton moved forward through the killing zone, making trip after trip to evacuate wounded Marines. When he saw that most of the fire was coming from a tree line, he grabbed a machine gun and charged the position. He ran directly into the enemy's strong point, firing as he went. He killed 8 enemy soldiers and drove the rest from the field. He was mortally wounded doing it. Singleton was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. His parents received it in September 1968 at the Marine Barracks in Washington. He was 22 years old. That was March. July was worse. On the morning of July 2nd, 1967, Alpha and Bravo companies pushed north along Highway 561 from Con Thien. Captain Sterling Coates commanded Bravo. Before stepping off, Coates had warned his Marines that intelligence placed 5 enemy battalions, more than 5,000 men, somewhere along the DMZ. He told them contact was unlikely. He was killed that day. The 2 companies walked into a tri-directional ambush. Fire from the front and both flanks. Accurate, effective, with artillery support. The enemy used flamethrowers for the first time in the war, setting fire to hedgerows along the road, forcing Marines out of cover and into the open where mortars and machine guns cut them down. A single artillery round hit Bravo Company's headquarters group and wiped out the entire command element. Think about the chaos of that moment. Your company commander is dead. Your gunnery sergeant is dead. Your radio operators are dead, and the fire is not stopping. Only 27 Marines from Bravo Company were fit for duty after the first day. About 90 from Alpha, the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Schoening, sent Charlie and Delta companies south with 4 tanks to attempt a rescue. Using helicopter and tank fire to suppress the enemy, Delta secured a landing zone for medevac, while Charlie fought its way north under heavy fire to pull out the survivors. That engagement launched Operation Buffalo, which ran for nearly 2 weeks. By the time it ended on July 14th, the operation had cost 159 Marines killed and 845 wounded. Marines who went back days later to recover bodies from the July 2nd fight found that some of their dead had been shot at close range, others had been booby-trapped, some had been mutilated. The men of 19 did not forget that. You carry something like that differently than a clean fight. It hardens you in ways that do not go away. Operation Kingfisher followed immediately in the same area, lasting from July 16th through the end of October 1967. The objective was the same: blocking enemy movement into eastern Quang Tri province. The result was the same: 340 Marines killed, more than 1,400 wounded, with 19 absorbing the bulk of the casualties. Enemy forces probed Con Thien constantly, attacking in company and battalion strength, sometimes wearing captured Marine helmets and flak jackets. The fighting around Con Thien during this period was some of the most concentrated violence of the entire war. In September 1967 alone, the enemy hit Con Thien with at least 200 artillery and mortar rounds every day. On September 25th, over 1,200 rounds struck the base in a single day. That is not a battle. That is a siege. CBS News broadcast footage of the bombardment. Time magazine put Con Thien on its cover. The American public watched it happen, but the Marines inside the wire lived it. Now here is where the story of 19 takes on a dimension that goes beyond the numbers. The battalion's nickname, the Walking Dead, did not come from the Marines themselves. According to most accounts, it came from the enemy. The story goes that during a ceremony in Hanoi, General Jia promised Ho Chi Minh he would wipe out the 1st Battalion 9th Marines as a birthday present. He allegedly used the term Debo Chet, which translates to the Walking Dead. The Marines should be considered already dead, just not buried yet. Whether the story is perfectly accurate is debated. What is not debated is what the Marines of 19 did with it. They took the name and made it their own. They wore it like a badge. A Marine named Jim Stogner, who served with Charlie Company and later earned the Navy Cross for killing several enemy soldiers with his knife during an ambush, put it plainly: the enemy never got the job done. In January 1968, 19 was sent to reinforce Khe Sanh combat base, just as the enemy launched one of the war's most punishing sieges. The battalion arrived on January 22nd, joining roughly 6,000 Marines and South Vietnamese troops who would hold that base through 77 days of relentless bombardment and ground assaults. Enemy artillery fired as many as 1,300 rounds per day into the position, every day, for weeks. The red clay turned to mud, and the mud turned to blood, and the shelling did not stop. 19 defended not just the main base, but the surrounding high ground, fighting off repeated infantry assaults on the hilltop positions, where a few dozen Marines at a time held against company-sized attacks. One of the battalion's hardest fights during the siege was the assault on Hill 689. They drove the enemy off at a cost of more than 30 casualties. The hill mattered because it overlooked the base. Losing it would have meant losing Khe Sanh. When the siege finally lifted, the Marines of 19 did not get a rest. They got another mission. But the defining chapter for 19, and arguably for the entire 9th Marine Regiment, came in early 1969. Major General Raymond G. Davis had taken command of the 3rd Marine Division in May 1968. Davis was a Medal of Honor recipient from Korea, a man who had led his battalion over 3 successive ridges in deep snow at the Chosin Reservoir to rescue a trapped rifle company. He was not a man inclined toward passive defense. When he arrived in Vietnam and saw that his Marines were tied to fixed combat bases along the border as part of the McNamara Line, absorbing artillery and waiting to be hit, he changed things immediately. "We wouldn't wait for the enemy to attack," Davis said. "Now we'd go after him." On January 22, 1969, Davis launched Operation Dewey Canyon. It was the last major offensive by the Marine Corps in Vietnam, and it was designed to do something no one had done before: send a full Marine regiment, the 9th Marines under Colonel Robert H. Barrow, deep into the enemy-controlled De Krong and Ashau valleys in western First Corps, right along the Laotian border to cut the enemy's supply lines and destroy his base areas. Intelligence had been building for weeks. Reconnaissance flights had spotted road construction on Route 548 in the Ashau and its extension, Route 922, inside Laos. As many as 1,000 trucks a day were observed moving supplies south and east toward population centers and military targets inside South Vietnam. The enemy's 6th and 9th regiments were on the move. A spring offensive was coming unless someone stopped it. Davis called the 9th Marines his Strike Force Regiment. He gave the mission to Barrow, who would later become the 27th Commandant of the Marine Corps. The operation ran in 3 phases across 56 days. Phase 1 was the establishment of a chain of mutually supporting fire bases, leapfrogging south from Vandergrift Combat Base by helicopter. Henderson, Tuntavan, Shiloh, Razor, Cunningham, each one carved out of mountain jungle and stocked with artillery from the 2nd Battalion, 12th Marines, so the infantry would never move beyond the range of supporting fire. On January 21st, Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines reoccupied Firebase Shiloh. The Walking Dead were back in the fight. Phase 2 began on January 25th, when the rifle companies of the 2nd and 3rd Battalions pushed out from their fire bases to clear the surrounding area and take up positions along the De Krong River. 1-9 would move into the center once the flanks were set. The patrolling Marines began making contact almost immediately. Small engagements, caches, a sophisticated 4-strand communications wire that a special intelligence team tapped into and began intercepting enemy transmissions. A well-equipped 150-bed enemy field hospital along the river. The scale of what the enemy had built in these valleys was staggering. Then on February 2nd, Firebase Cunningham took 30 to 40 rounds of enemy 122mm artillery fire from guns positioned inside Laos. 5 Marines killed. A howitzer disabled. The battery fire direction center knocked out. And here is a detail that proved critical. The enemy guns were beyond the range of the firebase's own 155mm howitzers. There was nothing they could do about it except take the hits. Bad weather shut down helicopter operations for 9 straight days. Resupply stopped. Troop movements froze. The delay cost the 9th Marines their momentum and gave the enemy time to strengthen his defenses. Colonel Barrow ordered all units to hold in place until February 10th. On February 5th, Company G of 2-9 was moving down a hillside southeast of Cunningham when the lead element walked into an ambush. Monsoon rain, dense jungle, impassable terrain. 4 Marines went down wounded, and no one could reach them. Lance Corporal Thomas Noonan, a fire team leader, charged through the enemy fire to reach the casualties. He was killed shielding the wounded with his own body. Noonan was 20 years old. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously. Phase 3, the attack into the enemy base areas, began on February 11th. The 3rd Battalion crossed the Da Krong River and pushed toward the dominant hill masses separating the Da Krong Valley from the Ashau. The next day, 1st and 2nd Battalions followed. Each battalion drove south toward the Laotian border. Consider the audacity of this. A Marine regiment, operating 50 kilometers from its nearest base, sustained entirely by helicopter in monsoon weather, pushing into terrain the enemy had controlled for years. On February 22nd, Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, was on a ridge overlooking Laos when they ran into an entrenched enemy company. 1st Lieutenant Wesley Fox commanded Alpha. Fox was in his 19th year in the Marine Corps. He had enlisted as a private during Korea, fought as a rifleman with the 5th Marines, worked his way up through the enlisted ranks to 1st Sergeant, then started over as a 2nd Lieutenant. When he asked for a rifle company assignment with 1-9, the personnel officer told him no one wanted to go to that battalion. "Stick around long enough," the officer said, "and regardless of rank, you'll end up the commander." Fox's company came under intense fire from a large, well-concealed force. He maneuvered forward to assess the situation and confer with his platoon leaders. As they moved to execute his plan, the enemy attacked. Shrapnel tore into Fox's shoulder. Every member of his command group was hit, except the executive officer. Fox stayed up. He personally neutralized an enemy emplacement, grabbed a dead Marine's rifle, and killed the sniper who had just shot the man in front of him. When the clouds parted in the afternoon, he directed airstrikes onto a machine gun position blocking the advance. The enemy broke. Fox was wounded again in the final assault and refused medical treatment until every one of his casualties was staged for evacuation. 11 Marines from Alpha Company died that day. Fox counted 105 enemy dead. Wesley Fox received the Medal of Honor from President Nixon on March 2, 1971. He retired as a colonel after 43 years in the Marine Corps. He died in 2017 at the age of 86. Meanwhile, elements of the 2nd Battalion reached the Laotian border. From their positions, Hotel Company could see enemy truck convoys rolling along Route 922. Captain David Weinkoff later recalled his men talking about getting down on the road to do some ambushing. On February 24th, Hotel Company crossed into Laos on a 6-hour night march, set up a hasty ambush, and when 6 enemy soldiers walked into the kill zone, they opened fire and killed 4. Over the following days, they destroyed enemy trucks, captured a 122mm field gun, took 2 40mm anti-aircraft guns, and killed more enemy along the road. A Marine regiment on its own authority had crossed an international border and shut down a section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The numbers from Dewey Canyon tell their own story. Over 1,600 enemy killed, more than 1,000 small arms captured, 807,000 rounds of ammunition seized, 220,000 pounds of rice, multiple artillery pieces. It was the largest haul of enemy weapons and supplies discovered in the war up to that point. The 9th Marines lost 130 killed and more than 900 wounded. Army General Richard Stilwell called Dewey Canyon a feat that deserved its own space in American military history. He praised the regiment's cohesion, its skill in mountain warfare, and what he called plain heart. As an independent regimental operation, projected 50 kilometers from the nearest base and sustained in combat for 7 weeks, Stilwell said, "It may be unparalleled. The enemy's planned spring offensive in 1st Corps never materialized." For the first time in years, the northern provinces were quiet. Dewey Canyon had broken the logistics chain that made those offensives possible. The 9th Marines received the Presidential Unit Citation for Dewey Canyon. 4 Marines earned the Medal of Honor during the operation. Fox was one, Noonan was another. Corporal William Morgan of Hotel Company, 2nd Battalion, killed in action on February 25th. Private First Class Alfred Wilson of Mike Company, 3rd Battalion, killed in action on March 3rd. 2 of the 4 did not survive to receive it. That is the kind of unit this was, the kind where heroism was so common it almost stopped being remarkable, except that it never did. The Walking Dead, along with the rest of the 9th Marines, left Vietnam in the summer of 1969. 19 had been in sustained combat for 47 months and 7 days. Based on a typical battalion strength of 800 Marines and Navy corpsmen, 2,892 men passed through the unit during that time. 747 were killed in action. 2 were missing. That is a killed in action rate of nearly 26%, the highest in Marine Corps history. In 2014, the battalion was deactivated for the final time at Camp Lejeune. At the ceremony, one of its former officers said what everyone who had ever served with 19 already knew. Not a better battalion in the world. The colors were cased. The Walking Dead had finally stopped walking. But what they left behind, in the mud and the mountains, and the memory of everyone who served alongside them, will never be buried.